This conference will now be recorded.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Blake Aldridge. I'm with the Upper Trinity Regional Water District, which is in Louisville. We're a drinking water and wastewater treatment provider, uh, like I said, based in Louisville, serving 29 communities in Denton and Collin counties. Uh, One of my big uh, jobs is education and outreach for the district in relation to water conservation, watershed protection, um, those programs that we have here at the district. And so um, today we're talking about pruning, which um, you may be wondering how does that relate to water conservation, but uh, Pat will talk a lot about how uh, pruning is good for the health of the plants. And so if we're taking care of our plants, especially if they're native plants, then um, we're going to be saving water in the long run as we're keeping these plants healthy and not having to replace them and things like that. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you can make sure to keep your mic muted during Pat's presentation, that would be very helpful. Uh, and if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat at any time. It looks like a little um, quote box, probably at the top of your screen, and then we can address some of those questions at the end. Um, and after probably the next day or so, I'm going to go through the attendee list for everyone who attended, and we'll give away a free, what we call Water Talk. Um, Actually, I forget what I called it. The Water Talk giveaway kit. But there'll be several things in there. One of those will be a rain gauge, a pack of the top 100 plants in North Texas, and a Water Less Y'all t-shirt. So, and if, and actually this is the first in our series of water talks that we're going to be doing throughout the year, maybe every 2 or 3 weeks or so, depending on just appropriate timing, speaker availability, things like that. And if you attend all classes, then you'll be entered in for a chance for one of those as well. And I'll put our events webpage, the link to that in the chat so you can make sure to keep up with that. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Pat Moyer. He's past president of the Denton County Master Gardener Association, who's going to be talking about pruning for success today. And I just first want to mention how grateful I am for him because I, I've really made him work for this presentation. We were going to do it uh, basically in his front yard, being able to be in the landscape, but there were going to be some uh, high chance of technical difficulties on my end, so we didn't want to risk it. So that's why we're doing it like this. But definitely made him work more than he should have. So, but with that, Pat, please take it away.
I'm going to try and, thanks for the introduction, Blake. But anyhow, I'm going to try and get this up to so you can see the screen in this full screen mode. And we'll see if that works or not. I can't remember what I did. I know we had it successfully done earlier.
You can hit
I
that
think,
from beginning button.
well, I need to get to the report itself, and I need to find that first. I think it's down here. There it is. So hopefully you're seeing it now. So if somebody could let me
Yeah.
know. Okay.
Yes, we are.
So before we get started, Blake made the comment that we were going to try and do this live and outside, and I think it was a really good attempt. But he had not only had technical problems, but I live on a busy corner, and so we have issues sometimes with fire trucks and everything else. So it was probably a good thing not to do it that particular way. Um, well, the other thing I wanted to bring up to you is this thing says pruning for success. And I am typically, for those of you who may know, I'm typically the guy that goes out and does tree pruning. Well, this is a little bit beyond that. And what we're trying to do is we're going to try and cover as much as we can, not necessarily just woody perennial plants, which includes trees and shrubs, but we're also going to try and address a little bit anyway some of the herbaceous perennial plants and what they look like right now. Um, but again, being a master gardener, oops, what am I doing? I have to give you a little bit of a commercial here and tell you a little bit about ourselves. And so we're an organization that really tries to help the environment, or tries to help the environment through horticulturally related studies and work throughout the county. And we have events basically going on all year. And we have a very active, a brand new, as a matter of fact, garden website that's at dcmga.com, which is the same as the old website, but it's much improved. So if you have a chance, why don't you go ahead and take a look at it? But we offer a lot of different things out there on either on the web or locally in person. And so we have, well, for instance, library series that we support down in Louisville, Flower Mound, out in Aubrey, and some other areas. We have events that we would like to participate in if you can. We have a plant sale in April, a garden tour, which is kind of neat. We do that in the first weekend of May. Fruit, vegetable, herb, and flower show, and then fall into gardening are both educational events that you could get involved in. We do have an active monthly newsletter that is fairly extensive and very comprehensive, so it'd be great. But the one thing really out of this whole page, if you want to take a look at it, is this help desk. And the help desk is really one of your keys to getting questions answered that you have on your mind. And basically, that allows you to send in either by phone or by email, or however you want to get it there to us. But we have a group of people that get together basically, and will give you a very comprehensive answer to any of your gardening questions. So take advantage of that. If you come off a little bit short on what I'm going to be talking about, there's a good place to start. So just keep that in mind. We also have, again, of course, all the social stuff. We have the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. Um, these are the big four that we have that we're going to be having. This, I told you about the plant sale April 29th. We have a garden tour May 13th, fruit, vegetable, and flower show. It's actually going to be moved. It used to be in the near the Carroll building. Now it's going to be moved out to the county fairgrounds. And then we have another event brand new last year, which is very successful, called Fall into Gardening. So keep that in mind. If you belong to an organization that wants somebody to come out and speak to you on specific subjects, you can contact us too. You can get that through our speakers bureau. Anyhow, getting back to the subject at hand. Um, what we want to talk about a little bit is how we're going to prepare our garden to be successful later. And, right now we've just gone through some fairly significant issues as far as weather goes. The little blast that we got pre-Christmas was an eye opener. I think we weren't expecting that to be that early. And right now I'm sort of, hoping that we don't see it, but I'm betting we'll probably get another freeze thing that comes out pretty much before the end of the month, or perhaps even early in March, which would be very bad. So anyhow, when do you start doing it, cleaning your beds? I'm starting now, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking out any sort of the woody stuff, or the detritus, some of the leaves and things. I will try and leave as much as I can because I don't want to have to cover everything with mulch because that's expensive. And if I already have stuff that's covering it, I can just cover what I have there with mulch. Some of the other things we're going to talk about is how to prune shrubs and trees, and that's our woody perennials, and then cutting back flowering plants, and that's our herbaceous perennials. If you recognize that I don't talk about annuals because annuals are going to be gone, and so they shouldn't be coming back. And if they do, that's more power to you. But I wouldn't count on them being there. Checking the soil health, you just want to make sure you have something there to be able to make sure that you haven't done anything to it or have had anything happen to your soil that could cause issues. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on mulch, which I think is one of the bigger things that we need to keep in mind, particularly going forward. This is something we're going to have available to make our gardens better. So here it comes, clean or not clean. This is my backyard, and you can see that I've got a lot of stuff coming up already. but I've got a fairly large covering of leaves. So, what am I going to do? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get as much of the stuff down as much as possible, just to open things up a little bit. I'll take out a top layer of leaves, but I may leave quite a bit of that in there. And one of the things I do when I do that is I'm looking for making sure that there's the florets that are down there that are rosettes, I'm sorry, that are down there from new plants are open a little bit. But then I also want it, so I want to get some of that leaf coverage back from there. But going forward, what I'll probably do is I'll probably take out about half of that and leave some of it in there because it is good natural vegetation or good natural fertilizer as it decomposes over time. And then I'll be actually covering a lot of that with mulch, which again will add to that same process. So what do we want to do when we're going out to go, look at our trees and shrubs and basically everything that's out in our yards? We want to do it early, and we want to take a walk about and sort of look at all the areas we've got, all of our little garden areas, anything that we have that's, we are counting on being there later on this year. Make sure that it's there. And so some of the considerations you need to take into account when you're looking at them, particularly for some of the larger things, but safety and clearance, or I'm sorry, yeah, safety and clearance. Safety, by safety, I mean, is it has something where you could actually, if something happened to that particular tree, limb, shrub, whatever, can it hurt your property? Can it hurt people? Uh, are there hazardous limbs? Are there things that could fall down? And so what you want to make sure of is you take care of those basically immediately. And what you want to make sure of is you've got it to the point where it's not going to cause any sort of damages as the thing continues to grow. Another concern is clearance, and I'm talking mainly again down here about utilities and utility lines and pathways. You want to make sure that if you do have a pathway into a garden area, and a lot of people do because it gives you good access for one thing. Make sure that those are cleared and they have the ability to stay cleared as the plants develop. Another consideration you have is health and aesthetics. And what I'm talking about there is you want to make sure that the plants have the best opportunity to do the best job they can as growing. And what we're going to be looking at there is we want to make sure that any sort of dead or broken branches, if they don't already fall on the safety and clearance side, that those are taken care of. If you have anything that looks like it's infested or diseased, again, make sure you get those taken out. Crossed or rubbing branches, and those are kind of something that may not be causing you immediate issues or immediate concerns, but over time that rubbing and thing can damage the limbs that are affected. It can also open those things up to diseases and insects. So if you have that type of an issue in your plants, you want to make sure you take care of that. Co-dominant leaders is kind of a long-term thing, and it has to do mainly with, and I'll be talking about this specifically, but it has mainly to do with younger trees and how you can get them to grow better by making sure you've taken care of a co-dominant leader. Again, I'll talk about it later. And branches with weak attachments, and typically with those are ones that either have some sort of damage done to them, either through nature or through insects or through some other things, windstorms, things like that. Make sure that they are removed and taken care of. So anyhow, that's the things you're going to be looking for when you're going through your garden, and make sure you try and take the time to note those. I'm not good at remembering stuff sometimes, so I try and write them down if I can. If I don't, I have a wife who will remind me, and so I don't typically lose a lot of those things. Anyhow, moving on. So again, I'm going to concentrate a little bit this first part of the speech about, or my talk about the woody perennials, and these are the ones that provide you with the best, more long-term abilities and work to go be able to make them part of your landscape. So you need to make sure you pay attention to them because they have the ability to obscure things like sidewalks and utilities and buildings. And so what you want to do there is you're going to go back in and you're going to look at the plants, make sure that they're not in an area where they're going to give you concern. And if there are something there, we're going to talk a little bit about it later, but you need to make sure you have some sort of a plan to handle that. If it's something where it's reaching up into a power line, if you don't handle it, your power company will. So it's always something you want to get taken care of as quickly as possible and not get it into a position where somebody else is doing your pruning for you, which typically doesn't look as nice as what you would want it to be. Um, Pruning things, we also always want to look at something that makes it look more natural. I'm not a big believer in these little balls and some of the topiary type things that are going around. So it's good. They're kind of fun to have, and if you want to maintain them, that's up to you. I typically don't. Most of the pruning that we're going to be talking about is not designed to maintain a topiary type shape, or we want to make. We're kind of going to do something a little bit opposite of what that type of growth would need. That brush growth or shrub growth would need to be to maintain a topiary type shape, or a round or a ball or whatever you want to do. One of the comments I always get is, particularly when I'm given things about trees and things, is the do I need to cut if I'm making a cut on a tree? Do I need to paint it? That used to be a big thing way back, back in the day, and I've used a lot of these nasty tar type things that I've used to seal up the limbs. But even for the smaller trees and for the larger trees, and for that matter, but there is generally no need to go do a paint. And even if you do a paint, and you don't just want to do that to make yourself feel better, that's fine. Don't use the big tar things. If you can go with um, um, just a light household type paint, internal paint, will work that way. The only time we really worry about that is if there's an issue that's caused some sort of a health concern among the plants. My son lives down in Austin area. They have super duper problems with oak wilt, and they basically restrict any sort of use of pruning either in the heat of summer or I'm sorry, in the temperate times in the fall and in the spring. If it's really hot or if it's really cold, they'll allow you to go prune your trees, and that's to keep the migration of the insect that causes the transmittal of the oak wilt. And so down there, when they do cuts, they usually do paintings. So you will see it on some things, and not necessarily in our area very much because we don't have a high incidence of oak wilt. But there are things that cause you to go do that. Something else is this root flare being exposed, and you can see the little diagram at the bottom of the thing and on the plant, and how that flare comes out of the tree. That area of a tree should always be exposed. So if when you're going to walk around and you see something where it's covered up and then you can't actually see that flare, it's a good idea to try and figure out a way to expose that, and then develop a plan of attack. And we'll talk about that again a little bit later. So what are the tools? This is just a basic listing, and there's a whole lot more out there. This is a pruning saw, and it's one of the tools that I would recommend anybody that's going to be doing any sort of pruning around the house or of trees or shrubs or anything else for that matter. These things are wonderful tools. You can get a 12 or 14-inch blade, and they can come up with a scabbard or with collapsible. This one happens to be a collapsible, so it looks like a kind of like a knife, a collapsing knife folder. Anyway, they are typically fairly sharp, and that's good to have it be able to either have that blade covered while you're storing it, because it is a good way to get yourself nicked. And a 12 or 14-inch blade is kind of standard. There are some that come a little bit smaller, and they're good particularly for something in an area where you're trying to get into when you're trying to get into smaller areas. Next one you're going to see is the pruning shears. We always recommend bypass shears, and that goes with our pruning the loppers we recommend. And by a bypass, I mean the blade looks like the blades pass each other as they're making the cut. It's sort of like, and it's not like some of them have what they call an anvil, and an anvil is where that blade comes down and actually crams into a base piece of metal. And we don't recommend those because those typically will mash things, and if anytime you lose the sharpness on it, it's a little bit more forgiving to bypass shears than it is with that anvil type, because it actually mashes the cut instead of making a nice clean cut. And you're going to hear a lot about nice clean cuts. And then there's a tip pruner. I don't really recommend tip pruning very much, because at this point in time, you may want to do it a little bit later when you're trying to generate some more vegetation around specific areas of your plants. But tip pruning is basically something that encourages growth of vegetative material around the area of that cut. And so we're not looking for that right now. What we're trying to do when we're out using them, we're out doing our pruning, we're actually looking for areas where we want to just open it up and make sure that the structure's there to support the growth that we want to see. Tip pruning was typically done, like I said, a little bit later. This is a neat one. One of the things that I always forget about talking about is having something out there that keeps your tools clean of different materials, and that's one thing. But what we also want to do is we want to make sure that we have hygienically cleaned tools too, particularly when you're going from tree to tree or plant to plant or shrub to shrub. And you know that, last year this guy looked like he had some sort of weird stuff on him, but I'm going to cut him back and then I'm going to use him on this next plant over here that didn't have it. You may be spreading something you're not aware of. And so what we try and recommend is having something available that will, take that, kill that particular area. And so it makes the tools a little bit easier to use, so safer to use between tools. At the very least, what I would recommend would be to clean your tools with a Lysol type of thing, or with about a 10% bleach water um, mixture, and just sort of rinse them around in there and then start your cuts. And very least I recommend is doing it when you start and when you're complete. Now, if you do it between the plants, that's always a good idea. It's very safer, much safer that way. And you really won't have the issue of transmitting diseases and things based on your tool cuts. And, when you stop and think about it, these tool cuts basically are wounding the plants. Now, in some cases where the plant's already had, it's been dead for a while and stuff like that, there's probably not much chance of us transmitting anything there. But if you're hitting into green material at all, this is something you should be concerned about, at least notionally, because it is a possibility to go do that. But that's up to you how often you want to do it. Again, if you know that the plant has some sort of disease history to it, I would definitely make sure you got it at least after you finish that particular plant and started on a new one, so you transmit something that is going to hurt the plant in the long run. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about shrubs, and these shrubs can be there's a lot of different varieties of shrubs that are out there. I have some mountain laurels that this kind of falls into the purview of. Some mountain laurels are maintained in a tree shape. Mine are kind of in a bush shape. And so I usually try and use this type of an approach when I'm looking at it. And what we're trying to do there is to make sure it's kind of like giving something a haircut. You don't want to be able to look at it and say, boy, you just butchered the heck out of that thing. You want to be able to look at it and say, well, I did it, but I really can't tell too much where I made the cuts, and I want to make sure it's healthy, and we've cut it back anything that was had issues. Again, what we're looking at is removing dead or diseased branches, if you see any, crossed or rubbing branches, and that involves you looking into the plant a little bit too. For Like I said, when I've got the plants I've got are evergreen, so they're a little bit easier. They're a lot harder to look into to see how open it is. Um, but when I'm doing that, I'm looking to make sure that again, all those issues are taken care of. I don't want anything in there that's dead or dying, and I don't want anything in there that's going to cause a rubbing action against some of the other plants. Um, so I'm going to go back in and I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to make sure that there's light that's available to get into the interior of the plant, and there's air movement that can get into the interior of the plant. That's always important, because that allows the plant to be able to grow and adapt very much easier than not. Some of these notes in here are kind of, I kind of inherited this, but if a shrub is too tall, consider moving it. That's a little bit hard. It's an easier thing to say than to go do. And moving it in the spring is not what you want to do typically. So I wouldn't do that unless it was absolutely necessary. But it typically you want to do that when the plant's still dormant. So as long as it's dormant, you can do that. Unless it's something that's an area where you actually absolutely have to. It's going to impinge on your walkways and things like that. I would not try and do that very often. Um, and that's the other note in there. Blooming shrub. If a blooming shrub is not blooming, consider moving it. And again, that's kind of a judgment call on your part. Sometimes, some plants, for instance, my plants I was just mentioning, they were out in last year they did not bloom at all. So this year I'm expecting them to come back and bloom. So sometimes they do go through periods where they don't want to bloom. The conditions aren't right for it. They've had a late freeze or something like that. So there's a lot of plants that are like that. So anyhow, consider that before you start, moving it. I'm gonna. This one causes some controversy, and again, uh, crepe myrtles are very, very pretty trees, and they do well around here. But people tend to want to make these severe cuts, particularly in the fall, and I think it makes them feel better because it looks neater. But if you'll notice the tops of the cuts that they've made here, over time, that knotting just makes it a lot uglier, and it's really not something that helps the plants at all. The plant doesn't want to grow that way, and one of the things we try and encourage is the natural growth pattern. And so when we're looking at crepe myrtles, the only thing we really want to do is we want to make sure that there's anything dead or dying again, any crossing or rubbing branches we want to remove. If you want to remove something on the lower level, that's fine too. Root growth, that's kind of a judgment call. But particularly out on the main stems where you're going to see your plants doing most of their blooming, you just want to do some tip pruning there. That's one of the few times I'll tell you that we need to do tip pruning, and it really don't need to, but it makes it a little bit easier, particularly if it's because a lot of times what will happen is once the plant stops blooming, it will leave some of the smaller branching at the top, and those may have some seed heads on and things like that. You may want to neaten them up by taking those off. But for the most part, you don't want to come back in and do a major whack across one of the main branches because it doesn't help the plant. And people think it makes it bloom more. Well, it typically doesn't. It's not something that needs to be done. It's not something that should be done. It doesn't help the plant at all. So anyhow, there's my story about crepe myrtles. I'm not a big fan of them having them butchered the way that a lot of some of the uh, nursery groups tend to do. I'm going to come back to this thing. This is tree pruning basics, but it does fit any sort of pruning you're going to be doing. And this diagram that shows how the construct of the branches is universal. I mean, you can look at any sort of a plant, and you'll see some degree of this, and even some of the non-woody plants, the herbaceous type ones, but primarily for a woody plant. And so when we're doing a pruning, we want to make sure that we understand that we're trying to get it to the point where when I remove that branch, I won't see some sort of weird witch's brooming or water spouts or whatever else you want to call it that makes the thing look kind of rigid, raggedy looking. And that's kind of what's happened over here. They've cut them straight across, and basically what's going to happen is there's going to be this mass of growth that comes out, and it doesn't help the plant at all, and it's not something you really want to see on crepe myrtles or any other plants for that matter. You try and maintain that so it doesn't have this overabundance of growth, if you will. So there's two different things you want to maintain in here. You want to understand where they're at. The first one is usually relatively easy to find. It's called the bark ridge. And the bark ridge is where that branch or uh, limb or whatever attaches to its mother part of its plant. So it can be a branch attached to a trunk. It could be a limb attached to a branch. So in any event, what typically happens is where that event occurs, there's a little bit of a mounding of material, and that's what this is up here. This is the bark ridge. Uh, when next time you go out and start looking around your trees, just go over and take a look at them, and I will just about guarantee you will find a bark and how it's at there. The next part is a little bit harder to find and a little bit not necessarily as evident on most plants, but there's a part called the branch collar. And it's usually a slightly swollen area below the branch, and it's where that tree or that branch exits uh, the bark area, the cadmium, and everything else as it comes out of that uh, out of the branch or out of the trunk, and that's again key. When you're making any sort of a cut, you don't want to interfere with either one of those. It destroys the texture, the structure of the tree to some degree, and doesn't help it as far as being able to recover from that particular wound. So anyhow, once you want to find both of those, you want to find the bark ridge, you want to find the branch collar, then you want to take a look at it and say, well, where can I make a cut that doesn't hit both of those? And so that's one criteria. And the next criteria is you want to be able to end up with a cut that is nice and smooth and as round as possible. And so if I cut it, for instance, down this direction, I would get a very oblong cut. So what I want to do, and if I cut it way up here, I would leave in too much material and it's going to cause an issue. So I want to get it to cut as close to this line, but again at an angle to the point that it allows the water to shed off it and to allow me to have a nice round cut when it's completed. And so that's where the cut's going to be. And that goes along that need is that requirement is also the same for any sort of a pruning you're going to be doing when you're removing a branch. You want to look to see if you have that. Again, it's not super hard to go do for some plants. It is a little bit harder to do with others. But the other part of it is that once you start getting used to that, it's kind of natural. You'll see it and you'll know, okay, I don't want to hit this, I don't want to hit that, and I want to end up with a nice round cut. And so you'll go back in and actually make that cut there without having to do complete analysis of the tree, so or the shrub for that matter. So again, getting back to that, again, this is kind of a reiteration of the same thing. If you have a dead branch, you're going to see the same thing. You'll see the bark ridge, you'll see the branch collar, and you'll want to remove that dead branch in the same manner. You want to come down, you want to end up with a cut that's between the two or on the outside of the two, and so it doesn't cut into either one of those areas, but it also allows you to be able to complete a cut that will allow to have a nice round finished part to it. Living branch, we just talked about the same thing. So your target, whenever you're doing it, whenever you're doing pruning on branches or trunks, tree trunks, or anything else like that, is between the bark ridge and the branch collar. So how do you make the cut? Well, there's a couple of different ways, and this one's kind of a smaller branch. This is on a shrub or something like that. And again, he's seen the bark ridge, he's seen the branch collar down here. He just comes in, and if it's a small enough branch, inch or so, you can use your pruning shears on. That's a great way to go do that. Um, if it's a larger cut or a larger piece or larger branch that you're dealing with, and this can, these go quite a ways out there. So you do a 3-cut method. And the 3-cut method doesn't sound logical to a lot of people. And when I first saw it, it didn't make any sense to me either. But what you're looking at, and assuming this is a large branch, you make your first cut underneath. And you don't have to go in very far. You can go in maybe 10% of the diameter. And what you're basically doing there is you're making an area where if the branch starts to collapse on you or fall down, it will stop any sort of peeling of the bark around that particular cut. And so it's very important. And if you don't pay attention to it, I will guarantee you will end up with something that where it peels, particularly on a green piece of material like this. It will peel it down, and you will have a large wound on that plant that you really don't want to mess with. You don't want to have. So the first cut's down underneath. The second cut may be 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, depending on how much you got. Because typically what happens is that this area out here has foliage, and that foliage adds weight. And so what you're trying to do is remove as much weight from that particular cut so that there's not this pulling that comes onto your subsequent cuts. So you do your first cut, you do your second cut or third, whatever it is, whatever you have out here, and you remove as much weight as you can from that particular branch. And that also makes it easier to dispose of material too, by the way. So it's a great way to go handle that. So you make your second cut, and it'll cut down here, and that just leaves you a little bit of a stub. And when you do that, then you're going to go back in and do your branch collar, and you're going to look at your bark ridge and then your branch collar, and you're going to make your third and final cut. Okay, so it's a 3 cut point. First cut underneath, maybe 10%, 20% of the diameter of the total branch you're going to be removing. Your second cut, which could be 2A, 2B, 2C, could be way out here. You're going to remove the weight. And your final cut is right up next to that bark ridge and branch collar. So again, I spend a lot of time with trees, so this is where you get you. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to talk to you about tree pruning basics for young trees. Older trees, and for a couple of different reasons, may or may not be something you're going to be with. And the reason for that is A, they're too damn big. They're too big to be messed with, and so you really can't get up into them. And having something that's causes issues may be better dealt with. May have to have somebody outside help to come deal with it. So again, like anything we're going to be dealing with either young trees or shrubs or anything else, we want to remove the broken, dead, dying, or damaged branches, and that includes any sort of plants. This time of year is ideal for doing that and moving things on and opening things up. So for small trees, what we're going to do is we're going to select a leader, and we'll call it the dominant leader because it's the one that has the most, seems to be the strongest center part of the tree. And again, this is for shade trees, and that can also be some of the understory trees like Mexican plums and red buds too, if you want to. You want to look for a central leader. And that's the tree, that's the limb or the branching area that goes straight up the most and has the most vertical work to it and has a lot of lateral growth that tends to support that. And see, that's the lateral thing. I'm sorry, that's the dominant leader. This one over here, it doesn't go straight up. This one over here kind of spreads off and it's a little bit smaller. So you want to look to make sure you establish, you look for that dominant leader. Then you want to, this is long term. You're going to look at in terms of where the lowest branch can be. And where's the lowest permanent branch? Well, the lowest permanent branches can be dictated by what your desires are. It can be dictated by outside forces. And by that, I mean, if it's near a sidewalk or something like that, that lowest branch eventually will probably need to be about 8 foot high. If it's near a street, it may be up to about 14 feet high. That's established by some of the local ordinances and stuff. So if you do have a question about that, make sure you contact your local government area and ask them what requirements they have over sidewalks and roadways. So anyhow, for a young tree, you may not be able to set up a plant to go do that. You want it to grow up to the point where you can be able to put it in where you want it. You want to have it established then. So for instance, if I've got these lower limbs here, if this is 10 feet tall and I've got a sidewalk over here, I'm not going to take these off. I'll take these off as the tree gets to that point where there's a 10-foot branch going out. I may leave them on there earlier, and just with the understanding that I'm going to be moving them or removing them later. And then you want to select the remaining scaffolding branches. You want to have a tree that's symmetrical as far as its scaffolding branches, the branches that go out to the lateral sides of the tree. So you're going to go sort of walk around, make sure you look at them. And then select temporary branches. And the reason you're selecting them is basically those are the ones you want to leave because you think the tree will have benefit from those branches being there. But for the most part, you're not going to, those will eventually be gone. So understand that. You remember earlier I talked about codominant stems. This has always been a kind of an iffy thing for folks to understand. And the other thing is this one also talks a little bit about how you do the removing the branches. This happens to be in the back of my house. This is an Eve's necklace tree, and you can see this is what I meant by a codominant leader. If you remember, we talked about dominant leaders, and we said kind of the main center line of the tree, and it follows that center line all the way up. And sometimes you'll get a spur or something growing off to the side that is almost the same diameter and makes the tree look almost kind of like a slingshot. For smaller trees, particularly for shade trees, and even for some of our ornamental trees like the red buds and Mexican plums, things like that, you don't want you might want to remove that codominant lead. For shade trees, it's almost a given that you probably need to remove them. That the spacing between these two pieces, these two parts of the leads, is gives you an idea that it's a very weak. What you're looking for is something that comes out more laterally. You know, if it came out more laterally, I probably have a little bit less of an inkling or desire to get rid of it. But because this is so weak, and typically one of the things, the way you can tell whether it's a weak or not, if you just put up your fingers like a V for victory, that's typically a weak uh, joint. If you put up your thumb and your index finger and look at that sideways move of that tip is an indicator of, and if that's assimilated on the tree or similar on the tree, that's a little bit a stronger branch attachment. So this is a weak branch attachment. If there is an issue that comes along with the tree, it's very likely that area is where the damage is going to occur. So we want to eventually remove that. And because this thing tends to grow at the same rate, and I'm going to tell you there's another part of this too, but you don't want to remove more vegetative growth than that will hurt the tree. You want to minimize that. So over time, what you may want to do is you do what they call subordinating, and what you do is you're going to take the top part of that limb off, and it tends to make the tree have more growth on the one side than the other. So this one had been subordinated about 2 years before. So this part of the tree has been growing up vertically in a little bit stronger position. And so we're eventually, I've determined that I'm going to remove that one. So again, there's my codominant lead. And so I'm going to take that left-hand branch off. So I'll come back in. And again, what you're seeing here is there's the bark ridge. Surprise, surprise. And the branch collars down in here. It's not quite as visible. And I know that what I want to do is I'm going to remove that point right there, because I want the tree to go more vertical. And so what I've done is I will go back in and do my 3-point cut. I will do my notching underneath, and then I'll take off the top part, and then I'll come back in and do the final cut. And so that's what that looks like. Again, what I'm looking for is that round area. And it's a smooth cut. And one of the reasons for that cut being smooth is I typically try and use something like a saw or something like that, a handsaw, as opposed to a chainsaw, because that does make that cut a little bit more jagged and has a little bit more of an issue. Again, what we used to do in the old days, we would have painted that. Well, we don't do that anymore. So anyhow, I let it go ahead and heal. And so you'll see some of this growth, and some people say, well, look at that. That thing looks terrible. It's got this ugly looking side to it, and it's got this hole. Well, that's really not a hole. That's basically the edge of the cut that was made. And this wood, the way this wood grows is called callus wood, and the callus wood grows over the top and basically seals it. If you went out and looked at that same cut right now, you wouldn't even see it. That thing is completely covered. This thing is gone almost totally vertical, and so it's much better. Oops, it's much better, much healthier tree. So anyhow, one of the things we always talk about is, well, how much can I take off, and what should my tree look like when this gets done? And this goes along with shade trees, or some our large shade trees. It goes along with a lot of our smaller trees, the red buds, the Mexican plums. And in that case, that was an Eve's necklace. The Eve's necklace did the same thing. You typically want to have a crown area that's about 67%, and the pruning area is 33%. And what that does is that gives you clearance, which may be a legal requirement from your town. And there's your rule of thumb. It's not a legal requirement that says you have to have that much. I see a lot of people that want to really raise these up, and to me, it doesn't make it. It takes away from the natural shape of the tree, and there's a lot of folks that do that, and there's a lot of reasons for doing it, and it to me doesn't help the tree become any better. So again, one of the things I said earlier was that for mature trees, there may be some considerations you want to take into account before you decide you want to go do that. And some of those reasons are, if you want to continue pruning and the tree's small enough, that's easy. We just covered those. If it's a larger tree, a lot of that parts aren't accessible. And one of my mantras is that ladders are not your friends. And in a lot of cases, power tools are not your friends. So you need to make sure that if you're going to take on something like that, you need to be able to feel comfortable doing what you're doing, and have 911 on your phone pre-dialed, and whatever. Climbing in trees should be left for professionals and kids, and that's another one of my mantras. So if not you, there are tree services out there that can, I said without arborists, and they can remove trees. I'm going to talk a little bit about arborists a little bit later, but to me, if all you're doing is removing a tree, and you have a confidence in the guys, and they've got their insurance and their other stuff, to me it's not unusual or not unheard of to go refer them or use them to go remove trees and do the stump grinding, things like that. If it's something where you really want to do it, you want to make sure that the tree is done properly, that the thing's been taken care of very well. Yeah, you need an arborist, and that's one of those things that I think is essential to make sure that you have confidence in what's being done with your trees. And most of the time, they will do a free evaluation. They'll tell you what it is, and they'll give you an idea of what the costs are and things. There are some variations in cost. I mean, let's face it. If a guy doesn't have an arborist, or if he's just going in there and whacking his stuff, he can do it a lot cheaper than somebody has a professional on staff. But I think in the long run, what you're trying to do is protect your trees and keep them moving and keep them healthy. You don't want to have somebody in there doing something that's going to cause the tree damage later. So who are those guys? This is ISA. This is an International Society of Arboriculture. Arborists. Anyway. And so when you do ask for them, they will not be surprised if you ask for references. They will not be surprised if you ask for them proof of their insurance and things, and if they're following the guidelines. There is a national standards out there for tree pruning, and these guys are required to go follow those guidelines. So just keep that in mind. If you want to find one and have a tough time doing it, this is the website, treesaregood.org. It gives you a way to go search for arborists, and the arborists are by area, and some of them are individual folks, and some of them are larger organizations. So you can find them just about anywhere. It gives you an opportunity to search by location or by name. So whatever you're going to do. So we're going to jump back again a little bit. Again, this takes you back into the walkabout. And we're going to talk a little bit about herbaceous perennials, those leafy ones that don't generate the wood structure that are typically the ones that go back into the ground or fall down into disrepair over time, and they do. There is still some work that needs to be done to them to make sure that the garden's cleaned out to the point where you can actually get more active growth going. So when you're walking about, you want to look for the herbaceous perennials, and they can be typically cut to the ground. If they're active growing, I wouldn't do that. But if you'll notice down here, I've got a lot of dead area around here where some of the plant stalks and stuff are still up. What I will do is I will go back in and I will remove that as best I can, getting it down to where the florets are or the rosettes are, and that's just where the plants are starting to come back up again. You don't want to destroy them, you don't want to hurt them, but you can take them down to just about to the point of the attachment of the stalks to where the old florets were. So that's another important thing. Oops, I'm sorry. That's another important thing to go do. If you remove all that, you're going to open it up. You're going to get more sunlight. You're going to get more air. You're going to get more growth, and they helps the plants recover. Uh, you can see how these columbines are doing. They were again. You can still see some of the leaf structure underneath there, but they've already started to come back up and grow again. So I may go back in. Typically, I've already pruned some of this back, some of the dead stuff back, because typically there is some left over from the prior year. But you can see how strongly they come back, and the fact that they've been able to recover without having any issues. But you also see the leaves are still underneath there. And basically, this area is kind of a rustic area, and I just kind of leave it that way. And so that helps insulate the soil. Again, provides all the health benefits of mulch. And it's really one of the areas where I think, we tend to make sure that the new growth is occurring. So again, some of the smaller woody perennials, I've always, Selby guy is one that I think everybody has. That's autumn sage, and it can definitely be left to cut back in late fall or winter, and it's not unusual, and a lot of people do it where they take it back down to 1 to 2 inches. Uh, it's pretty severe pruning, and a lot of people feel guilty about doing it because particularly about right about this time, you're going to see some growth going on them. And so, do I cut that back? Your call. But if it's not necessarily something that's really aggressively growing, I would go ahead and take it back to that 1 to 2 inches and let the plant come back basically almost from the ground. Um, this one happens to be in my backyard, and it's one where I tried to convince my wife that this is not a good idea, that we should basically take it back. But this has been about 1 to 2 years of growth, and so you can see that the woody material is just taken over. It's got a misshapen look to it. It's it could be that way in the wild, but I don't think I want it that way in my garden. So we've go back in and we will take this back. We've taken this back down a couple of different times. But every year, and it's something that you'll get used to once you get over that initial shock of trying to turn something like this back to 1.5 to 2 inches above the ground. It's something you really have to adjust yourself to and understand that it, these are very very hardy perennials, and they will recover given just a minimum amount of watering and things like that. So anyway. So we're going to go talk about mulch a little bit, and again, that's what I said earlier. The benefits of it are just amazing. Soil temperature change, leading to weed growth. It doesn't eliminate weed growth. It will limit weed growth, and typically something that's coming out of a moisture ground that's underneath the mulch comes out a little bit. So that's one of the things I think makes it much better. And organic mulch does break down and feeds the soil and provides the basis for a lot of the nutrients, and not necessarily nutrients, but the microbes and things that are in the soil. And sometimes my wife's she's decided that we should get hire neighborhood teenagers. If you can find a neighborhood teenager who wants to haul mulch, bless you. I haven't. So anyhow, I end up hauling a lot of it. Um, do you put it in by bags or do you order it in bulk? Your call. Um, Bags have the benefit of being able to be moved around without having too much of an issue. When you break it in, with large quantities, we typically do a 10 to 12 yard delivery in the spring sometime, and hand deliver it ourselves uh, with our wheelbarrows. So it's not something you're locked down to. And with my area, I don't have an issue with an HOA. So if I take a week to go do it or 2 weeks to go do it, I don't get the dirty looks. I don't have that. I don't have any issues. Bags are easy to go do. You can move them around by themselves. Uh, from an HOA standpoint, I think that they're a little bit more receptive or easier to deal with that type of thing because it looks like you're doing something. Sometimes when you bring it in with a truckload, it looks like it's just somebody dumped something in front of your yard and you haven't figured out what to do with it yet. So mulch and fall to protect plants, cold freezing leaves great. Mulching and place on top of the soil. 3 to 4 inches is generally recommended. Get more than that, and yeah, I think you lose some of the benefit. It tends to build up a barrier. Bark straw or wood chips can also be used. It's There's a lot of different varieties out there. If you do get something like a hay, make sure that you understand where it's coming from because sometimes they do contain weeds, and they may also contain pesticides that not conducive to growing your plants. And some people use plastic and rock mulch, and it can be used, particularly for decorative purposes. If you have a creek bed that you want to try and line or something like that, it seems to make that type of thing work well. Use it and it's good for walkways too, by the way. So it also comes out pretty easy that way. But rock mulch is really hard to use, and it does not provide anything as far as decomposition from the materials to feed the soil nutrients. So, and if you're going to do bed preparation, sometimes you have to remove the materials also. So mulching around trees. What we're looking at is we have a tree trunk. It's got some bare soil, and then it's got mulch. And the reason you do that is you want the root flare, which is one of the things we talked about up front. But that root flare, we want it to be exposed, and we want to be able to see it and not have anything around it. And then we're going to come back in with the mulch that helps it, particularly theoretically out to the drip line. For a large tree, taking out the drip line means you may have 15 or 20 feet of mulch line. Don't think that's really what a lot of people like to see. So at least have something out there that allows the tree to be their surface roots, because there are a lot of surface roots underneath any tree. It's covering as much of the surface root as you can. And if you can get out to the drip line, fine. If you can't, get it out as far as you can. One of the other things that always comes up about, well, you ever seen the stuff, I keep talking about not having anything around the base of the trunk and make sure the root flare is exposed. Well, one of the things you typically see, particularly in a lot of different areas, is that they will do what they call volcano mulch, and it just basically covers up the root flare. The damage to the root flare can be a couple of different things. It basically allows for the use of development of a lot of humidity and water that can allow for the insects and things to get involved with your plants. The other thing it is sometimes it allows the plant to do what's called adventitious rooting, and the plant itself, the tree itself, will try to send out roots because it thinks it's being covered. And the strength of the trunk is at the root flare, so you don't want to cover that up. You don't want to have it weak. If there's a strong windstorm or something like that root flare is where it provides the strength to maintain it and be able to react to any sort of wind load. So it's something really important they do. So that's really all I had. Again, one of the things, like I said, Master Gardeners, dcmga.com, you can get to that one. That particular website also has access to our help desk. I'm also a member of the Trinity Forks chapter of the Native Plant Society, and one of the things I always advocate for is the use of native plants. They're the ones that provide your best hope of maintaining a plant over time, particularly for things like the big winter storms that we had last year or 2 years ago, and some of the heat issues we had this year or last year. Because what it allows to do is that once those plants are established, they typically do use a lot less water, and to start them from scratch is makes sure that one of the issues you always run into when you try and start something like this from scratch is that you have to establish them, and the establishment requires exceptional amounts of water compared to what it would take to maintain a plant that's already in the ground. So, anyhow, that's basically what I had. Hopefully, you learned something. When Blake and I were talking about this, I made myself go out and look at my yard again, and a lot of the things that I've been talking about are stuff that I tend to remember as I'm going through the yard looking at things. So hopefully that jarred your memory a little bit, and you'll be able to go out and take care of your gardens as best you can. So that's
Awesome.
all.
Well, thanks, Pat. We do have a couple questions. Catherine asked, and this was referring to the crepe myrtles. Um, how does the pencil thin growth get big if we prune them?
It typically won't, because once it's a tree's established, what you're going to find out is that those main trunks that you got, because typically you have 6 or 7 main trunks, and the main trunks are going to be in the vertical positions, and your smaller your smaller limbs are going to, or branches are going to be coming off that. That's where your pencil thin ones are. Again, uh, year after year, what you're going to see is that at the top where the flowers were last year and the seed pods are this year. You won't get another piece of growth in there. And so what you want to do is if you really want to get after it, I would make sure you aimed at trying to take those off, because it doesn't seem like they will come off naturally for a number of years. So it's just one of those things. I don't know if that helps or not.
Yeah, I think so. Let's see. What is the best time of year to prune a red oak?
It can be done a lot of different times. Okay. We've always in the past we've always kind of said that it had to be done when the tree is dormant. And the benefits of doing it while the tree is dormant is that you see the branch structure, and the branch structure is important to the overall health of the plant. So it's good to have it done then. Anymore, what you'll find out is a lot of even the arborists that from ISA, they will tell you that you can prune at any time. And for red oaks, the issue of root wilt isn't as big an issue, so it's not something you need to worry about, particularly up here. So it's typically, they will typically do it as the weather, as the foliage increases too. So, and the other, I think the other thing that drives them to do that is the fact that they can't handle it all. They can't get to all the trees that they want to get pruned, and the people that have asked for them to be pruned. So you can do it just about any time of year, particularly for a red oak. Um, uh, Again, to me, the most desirable time would be while it's dormant, while it's doesn't have anything else going on in its life. But the arborists will tell you that it can be done other times.
Okay. Robert asked if we are going to send out a recording of this. Actually, we already have. Pat did this presentation for us a couple years ago, and I have that up on our YouTube page, so I can send that link um, here in a minute. Let me get this next question going for Pat. Rose says, I have some boxwoods and roses I would like to cut way back from last year's growth. Should I avoid doing so and only give them a haircut?
The roses typically benefit from having a fairly heavy, depending on, excuse me, the roses typically have are benefit from a fairly heavy pruning in the spring. I've always heard one of the rules of thumb, or one of the wives' tales, had to do with, you know, uh, Valentine's Day being a good one. So, yeah, you can take them down, and so and hopefully it's a healthy plant to begin with. Boxwoods, I don't really deal a lot with boxwoods. I do know that, if they're maintained in some sort of a formal shape, they can be a little bit of an issue. Uh, and it's kind of typically don't see the boxwoods in any sort of a natural looking thing to me. So, uh, but you still would do the same thing. You would basically, you can take them down. You can open them up a little bit. I wouldn't take them down like I would the roses. I think that you would probably be a little bit more selective in the pruning. Look more toward the internal parts of the plant as opposed to external stuff, because you don't want to generate more growth. You want to open it up so that the boxwood has the ability to have some air movement and light inside the top part of the plant through the plant.
Okay.
Okay.
My coworker Brian asks, or he says, I have young new trees. Is there an advantage to allowing the co-dominant leaders to grow and mature a certain number of years before removing one? Or is it just as healthy for me to remove them now?
Depends on how long they've been in. If this is their first year, I would leave it alone. I don't. When I first put a tree in, I don't think it's not a good idea to take any sort of foliage off. I leave the foliage on to at least get it established, get those root structure going into the ground and things like that. After that, it depends. I mean, you can take a look at it. I will try and get them off as quick as I can, because all you're doing is you're allowing the energy that would typically go into growing that dominant leader go over to the co-dominant. The one that I showed you earlier was a Eve's necklace, and when I had put it in, I didn't pay attention to it really, and so one of the things that occurred to me was having that co-dominant become a little bit more aggressive, and so it took me 2 years to get it off. You don't want to take off more than 25% of your foliage on a tree, regardless if it's a new tree, old tree, whatever. So if if I was looking at a new tree and I put it in and it was the first year, I would let it go completely. And then I would start looking at it in terms of trying to get, that off without exceeding that 25% guideline. Just
Great.
kind of
Um,
um,
any other questions for Pat? And you can unmute yourself if you'd like. But while we're waiting for a question, I will say that our next scheduled water talk is on March 1st, and that's going to be with Dr. Becky Bowling from Texas A&M AgriLife, talking about lawn care basics, which is a great time of year to start thinking about um,
Absolutely.
getting ready for the spring, thinking about our lawns, fertilizer if you need it, uh, proper irrigation, things like that. So Um, I don't see any other questions coming in. So once again, thank you, Pat, for putting up with me and um, um, lots of good info. And so I hope everyone enjoys the rest of today going out and pruning if you can before some possible storms tonight. But it'll be much colder tomorrow. So,
Well,
well, with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
all right. Thank you.